You know, I've always loved our nights out here.
The doctor's words were still rattling around in Frank Hensley's head 3 weeks later. Stage 3, she'd said, the way people announce the weather. Maybe 18 months with treatment, could be less. Frank was 67 years old, and he'd spent the last 11 of those years living alone in a cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, about 40 miles southeast of Missoula. The cabin sat on 52 acres of pine and Douglas fir, with a creek that ran cold and clear along the southern boundary. He'd bought the place after Martha died. Couldn't stand their house in Billings anymore. Every room had her ghost in it. Every corner held some memory that felt like swallowing glass. Out here, there was just silence and trees, and the kind of solitude that either saves you or buries you. Frank figured he was somewhere in between. The cabin itself was nothing special. One bedroom, a main room with a wood stove that heated the whole place when you fed it right, and a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. Solar panels on the roof kept the lights on, and the small refrigerator running. He had a well for water, a root cellar for storing vegetables from the garden he kept behind the cabin. He hunted elk in the fall, fished the creek when the mood struck, and split firewood until his shoulders screamed. It was simple living, the kind that makes you appreciate hot coffee and dry socks and a roof that doesn't leak. He'd been content enough, not happy. Happy was something that had died with Martha, but content. He knew these woods the way some men know scripture. Every game trail, every good fishing hole, every place where the elk liked to bed down. He'd seen black bears and mountain lions, and once, a wolf that watched him from a ridgeline for 5 full minutes before melting back into the trees. The forest had become his church, his companion, his reason for getting up in the morning. And now the cancer was going to take that away too. Pancreatic, the kind that moves fast and doesn't ask permission. The doctor in Missoula had offered chemotherapy, radiation, all the usual torture that might buy him a few extra months of feeling like death warmed over. Frank had thanked her and walked out. He wasn't going to spend his last year in a hospital bed. If he was going to die, he'd do it out here, in the place that had kept him sane when nothing else could. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, he'd gone about his business the same as always. Split wood, tended the garden, fixed the leak in the roof he'd been putting off. The cancer didn't hurt yet. Not really. Just a dull ache in his gut that came and went, easy enough to ignore if you kept moving. He hadn't told anyone, didn't see the point. His daughter lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. They called on holidays, sent cards on his birthday. The distance between them was measured in more than miles. They'd never forgiven him for leaving Billings, for choosing the woods over staying close to where Martha was buried. He understood. Grief makes people cruel in ways they don't even recognize. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when everything changed. The aspens had started to turn, splashing gold across the mountainside like somebody had spilled paint. Frank was sitting on his porch with a glass of bourbon. Doctor's orders didn't mean much when you had 18 months left watching the sun drop behind the western ridge. The light came through the trees at an angle that turned everything amber and bronze, the kind of beauty that hurts to look at because you know it won't last. That's when he saw it. Movement along the creek, maybe 150 yards out. At first he thought it was an elk. They came down to the water around dusk, and from a distance the shape was about right big, dark, moving slow, but as Frank watched, his brain started sending up warning flares. The thing was walking upright, not the way a bear walks when it gets curious and stands on its hind legs, but walking the way a person walks. Steady, purposeful, comfortable in its own skin. Frank set his bourbon down on the porch rail and squinted into the fading light. The thing had to be 7 feet tall, maybe more. Broad through the shoulders, in a way that made NFL linebackers look slight. It moved through the underbrush with a kind of fluid grace that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. And it was covered in hair dark, reddish-brown, thick as a winter coat, catching the last rays of sunlight as it walked. His first coherent thought was that he'd finally lost it. The cancer had gotten to his brain, or the isolation had driven him over some edge he hadn't noticed crossing. But the thing kept walking, kept being real, kept not caring about Frank's disbelief. It reached the creek and stopped. For a long moment it just stood there, and Frank got the strange impression it was listening to something he couldn't hear. Then it lowered itself to one knee with a surprising gentleness, like somebody settling down to pray. It cupped those massive hands in the water and brought them to its mouth. Frank hadn't moved, hadn't breathed. His bourbon sat forgotten on the rail, ice melting into amber. The rational part of his brain was still trying to categorize what he was seeing: bear, elk, person in a costume, hallucination. But none of those explanations fit. Bears don't kneel like that. Elk don't have shoulders like that. Nobody in their right mind would be hiking out here in a gorilla suit. And hallucinations don't cast shadows that long. Then the thing spoke. The voice came from somewhere deep in that massive chest, rumbling across the water and up the slope to where Frank sat frozen on his porch. 2 words, clear as church bells on Sunday morning, in English that carried no accent Frank could place. You watching. Frank's heart tried to climb out through his throat. The thing hadn't turned around, hadn't looked in his direction. It was still kneeling at the creek, water dripping from its hands. But it knew he was there, knew, and was waiting to see what Frank would do about it. Another 2 words, carried on the evening air like smoke. Not hiding. Frank stood up. He didn't decide to stand his body, just did it. The way you stand when a flag passes or a judge enters the courtroom. Some instinct older than thought, older than language. He walked down the porch steps, his boots loud on the old wood. The thing still hadn't turned around. It stayed there by the creek, patient as stone, while Frank crossed the 50 yards of open ground that separated his cabin from the water. When he got within maybe 30 feet, the thing stood. Slowly, the way you'd stand if you didn't want to startle a spooked horse. Then it turned, and Frank got his first clear look at its face. He'd expected something bestial, something out of a nightmare or a nature documentary. What he saw instead stopped him cold in a way fear never could have. The face was wrong for everything Frank knew about the world, not human, but not animal either. Something else, something between. The eyes were dark brown, almost black, set deep under a heavy brow. The nose was flat and wide. The jaw jutted forward, powerful, built for something other than speaking. But those eyes, God, those eyes. They looked at Frank with an intelligence that made his skin prickle, awareness that seemed to weigh and measure him and find him somehow worthy of attention. The thing tilted its head slightly, the way a dog does when it hears something interesting. Then it did something that rewrote every certainty Frank had ever held about the world and his place in it. It sat down. Just like that, lowered its enormous frame onto the rocky creek bank and crossed its legs the way a person might sit for a picnic. Then it raised one of those massive hands and pointed at Frank, then at the ground in front of where it sat. The meaning was unmistakable. Sit down. Frank's legs felt like they'd been cut loose from his body. The cancer, the bourbon, the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing, all of it combined into a kind of weightlessness. He walked forward 3 more steps and sat down on the damp ground about 10 feet from the thing, close enough to see the individual hairs on its face, close enough to smell it, not rank like he'd have expected, but earthy, like moss and pine needles and creek water. Like the forest itself, had learned to walk upright and talk. They stared at each other. Frank couldn't have said how long. Time had gone strange, elastic. Could have been 30 seconds or 30 minutes. The evening light was fading, turning the world grey and uncertain. Somewhere up the mountain, a whippoorwill called. The creek made its eternal sound, water over stone, the song that had been playing since before men walked on 2 legs and would play long after they stopped. Finally, Frank found his voice. It came out rough, dried out from not speaking all day. How do you know English? The thing blinked slowly. When it spoke, the voice was that same deep rumble, but closer now, intimate in a way that made Frank's chest tight. Listening, Long time. Radio. It paused, as if searching for the right word. Television. People talk. I listen. How long? Frank asked, though he wasn't sure what he was really asking. How long had it been listening? How long had it been here? How long did it live? The thing seemed to understand anyway. It looked up at the sky, at the stars just beginning to show through the deepening blue. When it looked back at Frank, something in its expression suggested amusement, though the face itself hadn't changed. Long before you, long after. It paused. You sick? It wasn't a question. Frank felt his jaw tighten. Yeah. How'd you know? Smell different. Body changing. Dying slow. Cancer, Frank said. The word felt small and stupid in this impossible conversation. Pancreatic cancer. Doctor says I got maybe a year and a half, probably less. The thing nodded, a gesture so human it sent a chill down Frank's spine. Why alone? My wife died, Frank said. The words came easier than they had in years. Like talking to this impossible thing was somehow safer than talking to people. 11 years ago, heart attack. Just gone. One morning I woke up and she was already cold next to me. Didn't even know she died in the night. Hurt, the thing said. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. Yeah, hurt. So I left, came out here. Figured if I was going to be alone anyway, might as well be alone where it's quiet. The thing was quiet for a long moment. The darkness was settling in properly now, wrapping around them like a blanket. Not alone now, it finally said. Frank felt something crack open in his chest, some place that had been frozen solid for 11 years. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, surprised to find them wet. What are you? He asked. Old, the thing said. Old people, different from you. Live in high places. Deep forest. Stay hidden. Bigfoot, Frank said. Sasquatch. Jesus Christ, you're real. Many names. The thing agreed. All wrong. All right. Words don't matter. Do you have a name? Something I can call you? The thing made a sound low in its throat, something between a grunt and a hum that Frank's mouth could never replicate. Then it seemed to think for a moment. English name. River. She called me River. She? Mate. Gone now. Long time. I'm sorry, Frank said, and meant it. Here in the darkness, sitting with this impossible being, grief was just grief. It didn't matter if you walked on 2 legs or 4, if you lived in cabins or caves. Loss was the same in any language. You understand, River said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I understand. They sat together as the night came down around them. Frank had 1,000 questions burning in his chest, but he found he didn't want to ask them. Not yet. For the moment it was enough just to sit here. 2 beings who'd lost their mates, watching the stars come out over the Bitterroot mountains. Finally, River stood. The movement was smooth, effortless, a dance of muscle and balance that made Frank feel every one of his 67 years. Come back, River said. Tomorrow, creek. Sunset. Yeah, Frank said. Yeah, I'll be here. River nodded once, then turned and walked into the darkness. Within 3 steps, the forest had swallowed him completely, leaving no trace he'd ever been there. No footprints in the soft earth. No broken branches. No sound. Just gone, the way smoke dissipates into air. Frank sat alone by the creek for another hour, listening to the water, watching the stars wheel overhead. His bourbon would be watered down by now, but he didn't care. He just had a conversation with something that wasn't supposed to exist, had been invited back for another. The cancer was still eating him from the inside out. Martha was still 11 years dead and not coming back. But for the first time since that terrible morning, when he'd reached over and found her cold beside him, Frank Hensley felt something that might have been hope, or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, it beat the hell out of waiting to die. He walked back to the cabin through the darkness, his feet finding the path by memory. Inside, he lit the lamp and sat at his small kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pencil, started writing down everything that had happened, every detail he could remember. The way River moved, the intelligence in those dark eyes, the voice like distant thunder, the impossible fact of English words coming from that mouth. When he finally went to bed, sleep was a long time coming. His mind kept playing the evening over and over, trying to find the place where reality had fractured, where he'd slipped from the world he knew into some other place where the impossible sat down and talked about grief. But no matter how many times he replayed it, the memory stayed solid. Real. River had been there, had spoken to him, had invited him back. Frank stared at the ceiling beams, at the shadows cast by the moonlight through his window. Tomorrow felt impossibly far away. He'd spent the last 11 years making peace with solitude, with the slow march toward death. Now there was something to look forward to again, something to wake up for besides just not being dead yet. Outside, the forest held its secrets. The stars turned overhead, indifferent and eternal. The creek sang its ancient song. And somewhere in the darkness, River moved through trees that had been here before the cabin, before Frank, before the whole idea of Montana as a place with borders and a name. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The next day dragged like a plow through clay. Frank woke before dawn, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the electricity in his chest, the way his hands trembled when he poured his coffee. He kept walking to the window, looking out toward the creek, half convinced he'd imagined the whole thing. The rational part of his brain kept offering explanations. A dream, the cancer spreading to places it shouldn't, loneliness finally cashing in its tab, making him see things that weren't there. But he knew. Somewhere deeper than reason, in the part of him that still remembered how to trust his own senses, he knew it had been real. He tried to keep busy, split a cord of wood, stacked it against the north wall of the cabin where it would stay dry, checked his traps along the property line empty. But that was fine. He wasn't hungry anyway. Around noon, he walked down to the creek, to the exact spot where River had knelt to drink. The ground was soft there, sandy soil mixed with decomposed pine needles. If River had been real, there should be footprints. There were none. Frank stood there for a long time, staring at unmarked ground. Then he looked across the creek, to the far bank where River had emerged from the trees. Nothing. No broken branches. No disturbed undergrowth. No sign anything larger than a deer had passed through. The forest kept its secrets like a miser guards gold. He walked back to the cabin and sat on the porch, watching the sun crawl across the sky with a slowness that felt personal, like time itself was mocking him. The ache in his gut was worse today. He'd noticed that the pain came and went like ocean tides, following rhythms he didn't understand. He took the pills the doctor had given him, the ones that were supposed to help with discomfort. They made the pain distant, but didn't erase it, like looking at fire through thick glass. You could see it burning, but couldn't feel the heat. Martha used to say he was too stubborn to admit when he was hurting. She'd been right about that, like she'd been right about most things. He could see her so clearly sometimes, not memory exactly, more like she'd worn a groove in the world, and the shape of her was still there, still visible if the light hit right. The way she'd stand at the kitchen counter in the mornings, her back to him, humming something tunelessly while she made coffee. The way she'd read on the couch, with her feet tucked under her, completely absorbed, the rest of the world falling away. The way she'd looked at him sometimes, like she could see all the broken parts he tried to hide, and loved him anyway. He missed her with an ache that made the cancer feel like a paper cut. The sun, finally, mercifully, began its descent. 4 o'clock became 5. 5 became 6. The light started going golden, then amber, then that particular shade of orange that only exists for maybe 20 minutes before everything goes blue and gray. Frank stood up, joints creaking like old floorboards, and walked down to the creek. He sat where he'd sat the night before and waited. The forest made its evening sounds, birds settling in for the night, small things moving through the underbrush, the eternal whisper of wind through pine needles. The creek talked to itself in that ancient language of water over stone. Frank's heart was beating too fast, pushing against his ribs like it wanted out. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The light kept fading, the shadows growing longer and deeper. Frank started to feel foolish. An old man sitting alone in the woods, waiting for something that couldn't exist. The cancer had probably spread to his brain after all. Tomorrow he'd wake up, and this would all seem like the fevered dream it obviously was. Then the forest went quiet. Not silent. Frank could still hear the creek, still hear the wind, but the birds stopped singing. The small rustling sounds ceased. It was like someone had turned down the volume on everything except the water and the wind, leaving a pocket of waiting in the air. River stepped out of the trees, not from where he'd appeared the night before, but from upstream, maybe 50 yards away. One moment there was just forest, and the next moment River was there, as if he'd assembled himself from shadows and fallen pine needles. He walked toward Frank with that same fluid grace, that impossible silence. When he was close enough, he sat down in the same spot as before, crossed his legs, tilted his head slightly, considering. "You came," River said. "Yeah. Wasn't sure you would, though. Wasn't sure last night even happened." "Happened," River confirmed. He looked at Frank for a long moment, those dark eyes unreadable. "You afraid?" Frank thought about it. He should be terrified. Every instinct humans had developed over millions of years should be screaming at him to run from this thing. But the fear wasn't there. Just curiosity, and beneath that, a strange sense of rightness. Like this meeting had been waiting to happen, and now that it had, some tension in the world had eased. "No," Frank said. "Probably should be, but I'm not. Maybe the cancer burned out the part of me that knows how to be scared of the right things." River made a sound that might have been agreement or amusement. Cancer not the worst thing. No? What's worse than dying slow from the inside out? Dying already dead, River said. Body alive. Inside dead, that worse. Frank felt those words land somewhere deep. He'd been dying already dead for 11 years, just hadn't found the words for it. River saw too much, understood too clearly. "You know a lot about dying. Know everything about dying," River said. His voice carried something heavy, something ancient. "Seen many deaths, carried many dead. Know dying, like you know breathing." "Your mate," Frank said quietly. "How long ago?" River looked up at the darkening sky. The first stars were showing themselves, tiny holes punched in the fabric of everything. "Long time, before you born, before your father born." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "She walk ahead, I walk behind. One day, maybe, I catch up." They sat in silence while the night settled around them. Frank wanted to ask how that was possible, how River could still be here if his mate had died before Frank's father was born. How long did these things live? What did they see in all those years? But the questions felt intrusive, like asking a priest to explain God. Finally, River spoke. "You want know things?" "Yeah. I got about 1,000 questions burning holes in me." "Ask. Are there more of you? More like you, I mean." "Yes. Not many. Getting less. We move north. High places. Away from you people. Cities grow. Roads grow. Noise grows. We grow less. But you're still here. Why?" River was quiet for a moment. "Born here. Mate died here. Body in ground here. I stay. Watch. Listen. Wait. Wait for what? Don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." River shifted slightly, and the movement seemed to cost him something. "You ask, I tell. But I ask too." "Fair." "Fair," Frank agreed. "Why you stay? Wife gone. Daughter far. You dying. Why stay in mountains? Why not go to people? Hospital? Daughter?" Frank felt the question slice clean through him. "Because I don't know how to be around people anymore. Don't know how to pretend things are okay when they're not. Out here, I don't have to pretend. The trees don't care if I'm sad. The creek doesn't care if I spend all day staring at nothing. I can just be, without having to explain myself." "Lonely," River observed. "Yeah, but it's honest lonely. Not the kind where you're surrounded by people but still alone. That's worse somehow. River nodded slowly. Understand. Alone with truth, better than together with lies. They talked as the stars came out, as the temperature dropped, and Frank's breath started to fog in the air. River asked about the cabin, about how Frank lived, what he ate, how he stayed warm in winter. Frank asked about River's people, where they lived, how they survived. The answers came slowly, carefully, like River was deciding with each word whether to share or stay silent. But gradually, piece by piece, Frank started to understand. River's people were old, not just long-lived, but old in a way that made human history look like a sneeze. They'd been in these mountains when glaciers still covered the north, when the megafauna still walked, when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. They'd watched those first people spread and grow and multiply, had learned to stay hidden as human numbers swelled and their weapons improved. They developed their own culture, their own knowledge, their own way of moving through the world that left no trace. "Why talk to me?" Frank asked. "Why now, after staying hidden for so long?" River was quiet for a long time. The creek filled the silence, patient and eternal. Finally, he said, "You different. Smell different. Not just sick body. Something else. Like," he paused, searching for words, "like door left open. Most people, doors closed, locked, don't want see, don't want know, too busy, too scared, too sure they understand everything. You? Door open. Maybe because dying, maybe because alone, maybe because you already know world, not what people think." Frank felt tears on his face, cold in the mountain air. He didn't bother wiping them away. "I don't know anything anymore. Thought I did, once. Thought I understood how life worked, what mattered, where I fit. Then Martha died, and it all just dissolved. Like it was never real to begin with." "It was real," River said quietly. "Love real, pain real, both true, world bigger than people think. Room for many truths. Is that what you are? Another truth people don't want to see? Maybe. Or maybe just old thing that don't fit in new world. Maybe we mistake, evolution mistake. Branch that should have died, but didn't. Hanging on, getting smaller, watching new branch grow where old branch was." There was something unbearably sad in River's voice, something that resonated with the hollowness Frank had been living in for 11 years. Two dying things, sitting by a creek, watching the stars wheel overhead. One dying from cancer, one from the simple fact that the world had moved on and left his kind behind. "What happens when you die?" Frank asked. "Your people, I mean. Do you have, I don't know, beliefs about what comes after?" River turned his massive head to look at Frank directly. In the starlight, his eyes reflected a faint gleam, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. "Go back," he said simply, "bones to earth, flesh to trees, blood to water, breath to air. Give back what was borrowed. Become forest again. No heaven, no hell, no judgment. Forest don't judge. Forest just takes back, makes new from old. Nothing wasted, nothing lost, just different." Frank thought about that. About Martha's body in a casket in a cemetery in Billings, sealed away from the earth that wanted to reclaim her, pumped full of chemicals that would keep her preserved for years. It had seemed important at the time, proper. Now it just seemed cruel. They'd taken her from the cycle, locked her away, as if death was something to be defeated rather than accepted. "That sounds better," Frank said. "More honest." "Honest dying," River agreed. "Hard part not dying. Hard part, living first. Living well. Living true. That hard, dying easy." They sat together until the cold drove Frank to his feet, his joints protesting, the ache in his gut flaring with the movement. River stood too, unfolding that enormous frame with enviable ease. "Tomorrow?" Frank asked. "Tomorrow," River agreed. Then he paused. "Question. You have tools. Things for making. Tools? Yeah, I got tools. Why? Show you something. Tomorrow. Bring tools. And River paused, seemed to search for the word. Sharp knife. Good steel. What are we making? Teaching. I teach. You learn. Fair trade. You teach me your words. I teach you my ways. Frank felt something kindle in his chest. Small but bright. Purpose. Direction. Something to do besides wait for the cancer to finish its work. Yeah, okay. I'll bring what you need. River nodded once, then turned and melted into the darkness. Frank stood alone by the creek, watching the place where River had vanished, wondering if he'd just agreed to something profound or foolish or both. He walked back to the cabin, his breath steaming in the cold air, and spent an hour going through his tools. Axe, hatchet, saw, various knives. He had no idea what River had in mind, but a strange excitement was building in him, the kind he hadn't felt since before Martha died. He was going to learn something, be taught something. It didn't matter what, just the fact of it, the sharing, the connection, felt like water after years in the desert. That night, he slept better than he had in months. His dreams were full of forests and rivers and stars wheeling overhead, and somewhere in all that darkness, a voice like distant thunder teaching him words he'd never known he needed to learn. The teaching began the next evening, and it changed everything Frank thought he understood about patience. River was waiting when Frank arrived at the creek, carrying a canvas bag full of tools. The big creature sat in the same spot, but this time he had something with him, a piece of wood, maybe 3 feet long and thick as Frank's thigh. It looked like it had been dead for years, the bark fallen away, the surface weathered smooth and gray. Sit, River said, and Frank did. River picked up the wood with one massive hand, turned it over, examined it the way a jeweler might study a diamond. Then he looked at Frank. What you see? Frank studied the wood. Dead branch. Cedar, I think. Been down a while. Look deeper. Frank looked again, not sure what he was supposed to see. It was just wood. Dead wood. I'm not sure what you mean. River set the wood down between them. Inside, he said, tapping the wood with one thick finger. Inside is bowl. Waiting. My people, we find what waits inside. We help it come out. Not make bowl. Release bowl. Frank stared at the wood, trying to see what River saw. It was a way of thinking that felt foreign, backward. You didn't release a bowl from wood. You carved it, shaped it, forced it into being. But River was shaking his head slowly, like he could hear Frank's thoughts. Your people make things, River said. Force wood to be what you want. My people different. We listen to wood. Wood tells us what it wants to be. We help. He picked up the wood again, held it close to his face, seemed to be listening to it. This one wants to be bowl, but small bowl, eating bowl, for hands to hold. How can you tell? Shape, weight, how it sits in hand, how grain moves. River traced one finger along the wood, following lines Frank could barely see in the fading light. Grain is river, river flows. You follow river, bowl comes easy. Fight river, bowl breaks. River set the wood down and gestured to Frank's bag. Your knife, good steel. You have? Frank pulled out his hunting knife, 8 inches of carbon steel he'd owned for 20 years. The handle was worn smooth from use, comfortable in his palm like an old friend. He'd gutted more deer than he could count with that knife, skinned elk, filleted fish. He knew it intimately. River examined the knife without touching it, leaning close, those dark eyes taking in every detail. Good knife, he finally said. Knows work, not new, better. He looked at Frank. New things not know themselves yet. Old things know. Trust old things. He picked up the wood again and gestured for Frank to come closer. Frank moved until he was sitting beside River, close enough to smell that earthy scent, close enough to see the individual hairs on River's arm reddish-brown shot through with silver. River positioned the wood and pointed to a spot near one end. Start here. River starts here. See? He traced an almost invisible line, flows down, curves left, goes deep, comes back. Follow. Frank took the knife and pressed it to the wood where River indicated. Started to cut, the way he'd carved 100 pieces of wood, putting pressure behind the blade, forcing it through the grain. No, River said sharply. Stop. Frank stopped. Too hard, too fast, too loud. River took Frank's hand. His fingers were impossibly thick, rough as tree bark, but gentle. Listen first. Feel wood. It tells you how deep to cut. How fast? Which way? He guided Frank's hand, applying pressure so light it barely made a mark. Like this. Whisper to wood, don't shout. They worked like that for an hour, River guiding Frank's hand, teaching him to feel the resistance of the grain, to sense when the blade wanted to go deep and when it wanted to glide along the surface. It was maddening and meditative all at once. Everything Frank knew about woodworking, everything he'd learned over 67 years, seemed to be wrong. Too aggressive, too certain, too human. This how your people always worked? Frank asked during a break, his hands cramping from the unfamiliar delicacy of the work. Always, River confirmed. We don't have forges, don't make metal. Find metal sometimes your tools, lost or thrown away. Find stone too. Learn to shape what we find, but mostly learn to work with what is already sharp. Obsidian, flint, bone, and learn patience. Stone and bone, more patient than metal, have to be patient back. How long does it take to make a bowl like this? River seemed amused. How long? Maybe 10 days, maybe 20. Depends on wood, depends on rain. Wood cuts different when wet. Depends on hands. Tired hands make mistakes. Rush makes breaks. Patience makes beauty. 20 days to make a bowl. Frank had lived his whole life in a world of productivity, efficiency, getting things done. 20 days would have seemed insane before. Now, with maybe a year left to live, it seemed almost reasonable. What else was he going to do with his time? Count down the days. Watch the cancer eat him. At least this was something. Purpose measured in shavings and slow revelation. They worked until full dark, until Frank literally couldn't see the wood anymore. River seemed unbothered by the darkness, his eyes adjusted in ways Frank's couldn't, seeing by starlight what Frank needed the sun for. Finally, River set the wood aside. Tomorrow, he said, bring bowl, keep working. I watch, correct, teach. I don't know if I'm cut out for this, Frank admitted. I'm not a patient man, never have been. No, River agreed, but dying teaches patience. Can't rush dying. It comes when it comes. Same with bowl. Bowl comes when it comes. You learn patience, or you learn nothing. That's some kind of ancient wisdom? River made that sound. That might have been laughter. No, just truth. Truth not always wise. Sometimes truth just hard. Frank gathered his tools and stood, his back protesting, the ache in his gut announcing itself with authority. He must have made a face because River tilted his head, concerned. Pain bad tonight? It's manageable. Some days worse than others. My people know plants, River said. Things that help pain, not cure, but help. I bring tomorrow. You try. Modern medicine's already given me pills for that. Pills make you stupid, make you not hear. River tapped his own chest. Plants different. Pain quieter. But you, still awake, still alive. Better to feel pain and be here than feel nothing and be gone. Frank thought about that on the walk back to his cabin. The pills the doctor had given him did make him foggy, distant from himself. They turned the world into something happening to someone else, somewhere far away. Maybe River was right. Maybe feeling the pain was better than not feeling anything at all. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Every evening at sunset, Frank would walk down to the creek with a half-carved bowl. River would be there, waiting, patient as stone. They would work until dark, River teaching with his hands and his voice, correcting Frank's mistakes, showing him how to follow the grain, how to listen to what the wood wanted. And slowly, impossibly, a bowl began to emerge. But the teaching wasn't just about carving. River taught Frank to see the forest differently, showed him which plants were good for what ailments: willow bark for pain, yarrow for wounds, devil's club root for blood sugar. Taught him to read animal signs Frank had been walking past for 11 years without seeing. Showed him how to move quietly, how to place his feet so they made no sound, how to become part of the forest rather than a visitor in it. Your people take from forest, River explained one evening. Hunt, cut, mine, build. Always taking, never asking, never listening. Forest gives anyway, but forest remembers. One day, maybe, forest stops giving. And your people? We ask. We listen. We give back. Take a deer, thank deer. Leave organs for scavengers. Plant seeds where we walk. Clean streams. Move camps so forest can rest. Balance. Always balance. Frank found himself thinking about that concept, balance, as he lay awake at night, the cancer gnawing at him, the pain worse some nights than others. True to his word, River had brought him plants to chew, bitter things that made his mouth numb, but quieted the ache to a distant murmur. The clarity was worth the taste. He could think again, feel again, be present in his own dying, instead of watching it happen from behind a chemical fog. The bowl was taking shape now. He could see it emerging from the wood, just like River had said. The curve of it, the weight of it in his hands. It was beautiful in a way that surprised him, not perfect, not symmetrical, but honest. The grain showed through, rivers of darker and lighter wood flowing around the curve. His hands had made this, but it felt like the wood had decided what it wanted to be, and he just helped it get there. One evening, maybe 3 weeks into their routine, Frank asked the question that had been building in him. Why are you doing this? Teaching me. What do you get out of it? River was quiet for a long time. They were sitting by the creek as usual, the bowl between them now nearly finished, just needing sanding and oiling. The October air was getting colder, winter announcing itself in the way frost lingered past noon. Lonely, River finally said. Long time alone, long time watching. Your kind everywhere now, my kind almost gone. Last of my people went north, 20 winters ago. Said go with them. I said no. Couldn't leave her. He gestured vaguely toward the mountains. Bones up there. High place. Boulder field where flowers grow in summer. She loved flowers. Stayed to be near her. Stupid maybe. Bones don't care. But I care. That's not stupid, Frank said quietly. I stayed in Billings for 2 years after Martha died. Couldn't leave the house. Felt like leaving would be. I don't know, betraying her somehow, admitting she was really gone. Yes, River said. That. Exactly that. He looked at Frank with those dark eyes. You understand. Other people don't understand. They say move on, let go, find new person. Like love is shoe you wear out and replace, but love not shoe. Love is root, goes deep. Can't pull out just because tree falls. They sat in silence, two grieving creatures bound by losses, separated by time, but united by the weight of absence. Frank felt something shift in him, some understanding clicking into place. This wasn't just about teaching and learning. This was about connection, about not being alone in the vast indifference of the universe, about two dying things finding each other in the twilight and saying, I see you, I know you, you matter. The bowl's almost done, Frank said eventually. What happens when it's finished? You use it, River said. Eat from it. Every day. Remember what it taught you. What did it teach me? River smiled. Frank had learned to read the subtle shifts in that face, the small ways River expressed emotion. Taught you patience, taught you listening, taught you that forcing breaks things, but guiding releases them. Same lessons for bowl as for life. Same lessons for dying. How do I die well? Frank asked. The question surprised him. He hadn't meant to ask it, hadn't even known he was thinking it. But there it was, hanging in the cold air between them. River didn't answer right away. He picked up the bowl, ran his thick fingers over the smooth wood, felt the weight of it. Die like tree dies, he finally said. Tree don't fight when time comes. Tree gives back. Leaves fall, feeds soil. Trunk falls, becomes home for beetles and mushrooms. Roots hold earth, keeps stream from washing away. Tree serves forest even in dying. Maybe especially in dying. I don't know how to do that. Don't know what I'm supposed to give back. You teach your daughter. Tell her true things. Tell her about this. River gestured to the bowl, to the creek, to the forest around them. Tell her about slowing down, listening, being present. That gift, that giving back. Frank felt his throat tighten. She doesn't call, hasn't in 6 months. I don't think she wants to hear from me. Want and need different things. She needs, whether she wants or not. You are her root. When you gone, she will wish she listened. Better for her to listen now. Better for you to speak now, while can. The truth of it hit Frank like a physical blow. He'd been so angry at Sarah for not understanding why he'd left, for judging him, for choosing distance over difficulty. But River was right. He was her father, her only parent now. When he was gone, she'd have nothing. No stories, no lessons, no last words. Just absence and regret, and things unsaid. I don't know what to say to her, Frank admitted. Say true things, say scared things, say love things. Words less important than speaking. Silence teaches nothing but silence. That night, Frank sat at his small table with paper and pen and tried to write a letter to his daughter. The words came hard, each sentence feeling inadequate, too small to contain what he needed to say. But he kept writing, kept trying, knowing that imperfect words were better than perfect silence. He wrote about the cancer, about the choice to die out here rather than in a hospital, about why he'd left Billings, why he couldn't stay in that house full of ghosts. He wrote about Martha, about how much he'd loved her, how much he still loved her, how loving someone doesn't end just because they do. He wrote about the forest, about learning to be still, about finding a kind of peace in solitude even though the loneliness never fully went away. He almost wrote about River. His pen hovered over the page, trying to decide if it was too much, too strange, too unbelievable. But then he thought about what River had said, say true things, and he wrote it all down. The creature by the creek, the teaching, the bowl, the lessons about dying like a tree dies, giving back, staying useful even at the end. He sealed the letter and put it aside. Tomorrow he'd drive into town, mail it before he could second-guess himself. Maybe Sarah would read it. Maybe she'd think he'd lost his mind. Either way, he would have spoken. The rest was up to her. The bowl was finished 2 days later. River pronounced it done with a solemn nod, running his hands over the smooth wood one final time. Frank had oiled it with linseed oil, rubbed it until the grain glowed, until the wood seemed lit from within. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever made, and he knew he'd never make anything like it again. Didn't need to. This one bowl contained everything he needed to learn. Now you teach me, River said. Teach you what? Words, stories, your people's things, fair trade. I teach you forest. You teach me about. River paused, searching, about dying, your kind of dying, hospital dying, medicine dying, different from forest dying. Want to understand? So Frank taught. He talked about doctors and treatments, about scans and diagnoses, about the industrial machinery of modern death. He explained chemotherapy and radiation, how they tried to kill cancer by almost killing the patient, how sometimes the cure felt worse than the disease. He talked about insurance and bills, and the strange economics of dying in America, where death was expensive and the poor died faster than the rich. River listened with that intense focus he brought to everything, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. Why do you fight death so hard? Why seal bodies away from earth? Why spend last days in white rooms, under white lights, when outside world's still here? Questions Frank didn't have good answers for, because the answers were about fear and denial, and the human conviction that death was an enemy to be defeated rather than a transition to be accepted. Seems lonely, River finally said. Your way seems like dying alone even when people there. Dying in boxes, dying in machines, not part of anything, just ending. Yeah, Frank agreed. Yeah, it is lonely. That's why I left. Couldn't die like that. Needed to die here, where things make sense, where death is just part of the cycle. Good choice, River said. Better to be true than decomfortable. Winter was coming. Frank could feel it in his bones, could see it in the way the aspens had dropped all their gold, standing naked against the grey sky. The pain was worse now, harder to ignore even with River's plants. He was losing weight, his clothes hanging loose, his face gaunt in the mirror. The cancer was accelerating, moving faster than the doctor had predicted. Maybe he had months left, maybe less, but he wasn't afraid. That was the strangest thing. He'd thought dying would terrify him, that when the end got close he'd panic, grasp for life, beg for more time. Instead, he felt calm, settled, like he'd come to the end of a long journey and could finally rest. River had taught him that, had shown him that death wasn't an enemy or a failure, just a changing, a giving back, a return to the forest that had given him everything. They still met every evening when weather allowed. Sometimes they worked on small projects, River teaching Frank to weave pine needles, to make rope from cedar bark, to read the sky for weather changes. Sometimes they just sat and talked, sharing stories, trading pieces of their vastly different lives. Frank learned about River's childhood in caves high in the mountains, about the slow, patient culture of his people, about the songs they sang and the dances they performed under the full moon. River learned about Vietnam, about working construction, about marriage and loss and the peculiar loneliness of modern American life. One evening in late November, snow falling soft and steady, River brought something with him, a small bundle wrapped in leather. He sat down and unwrapped it carefully, revealing a carving. It was a human figure, maybe 6 inches tall, recognizable as Frank. The same lean build, the same bald head, the same slightly stooped shoulders. The detail was extraordinary, carved from a single piece of cedar, showing Frank in profile, looking out at something beyond the frame of the carving. For you, River said. So when gone, something remembers, something stays. Frank held the carving with hands that trembled. It's beautiful. I don't know what to say. Don't say, just keep. Remember teaching. Remember forest. Remember friend. Friend. The word landed with weight. Frank realized that's what they were, impossible as it seemed. A dying old man and an ancient creature from humanity's nightmares and campfire stories. Friends. Companions. Two beings who'd found each other at the end and made the ending mean something. I need to tell you something, Frank said. The doctor said 18 months. That was 4 months ago. I can feel it now, feel it getting worse. I don't think I have much time left. Maybe until spring if I'm lucky. Maybe not even that. River nodded slowly. I know. I smell it. Body changing faster now. Close to end. I'm not scared, Frank said. That's what I wanted to tell you. I thought I would be, but I'm not. You taught me that. Taught me how to let go. Good, River said softly. Fear makes bad death. Acceptance makes good death. You will have good death. Forest will take you back. You will feed trees, become earth, keep going. Not ending. Just changing. They sat together in the falling snow, two forms becoming slowly white, becoming slowly part of the winter forest. The creek was quieter now, ice forming at the edges, the water moving sluggish and thick. The woods were settling in for winter, for the long sleep, for the time of waiting. Everything slowing down, everything getting ready. Frank knew with absolute certainty that he would not see another summer. The cancer had its teeth in him now, was pulling him down into darkness. But he found he didn't mind, didn't resent it. Death was coming the way, winter was coming inevitable, natural, part of the cycle. The forest would take him back. His body would feed the earth, become trees and moss and mushrooms. He would give back everything he'd borrowed. The debt would be paid. Thank you, Frank said quietly. For everything, for teaching me, for seeing me, for being here. River reached out and placed one massive hand on Frank's shoulder. The gesture was awkward but genuine, carrying a weight of meaning that words couldn't touch. Thank you too, for listening, for learning, for reminding me why we talk, why we teach, why we stay even when staying is hard. They sat until Frank's teeth were chattering, until his hands were numb, until he knew he had to go inside before the cold finished what the cancer had started. He stood slowly, painfully, everything protesting. River stood with him. Tomorrow? Frank asked, though he wasn't sure he'd make it tomorrow. Wasn't sure his body had another trip to the creek in it. If tomorrow comes, I be here, River said. If not tomorrow, I understand. When you're ready to die, go inside, lie down, let go. I will know, I will find you. I will take you to high place, to good place. We'll put you in earth where trees grow, where flowers come in spring. We'll stay until bones clean, until you part a forest again. This I promise. Frank felt tears freezing on his face. You do that, even though we've only known each other a few months. Time not matter, River said. Connection matters. You are friend, I honor friend. This is way. They parted then, River disappearing into the snowy darkness. Frank stumbling back to his cabin, the carved figure clutched in his frozen hands. Inside, he built up the fire, made coffee, sat at his table, and looked at the carving. Looked at his own face, rendered in cedar, looking out at something he couldn't see. Looking out at the future, maybe, or the past, or just the endless present, the eternal now, the moment that was all anyone ever really had. He thought about Sarah, about the letter he'd sent. She hadn't responded, might never respond. That was okay. He'd said what needed saying. The rest was her burden to carry or release as she chose. He'd given her what he could: truth, love, acknowledgement of his failures. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it was done. The bowl sat on his shelf, glowing in the firelight. Every morning he ate from it, oatmeal, soup, whatever his shrinking stomach could handle. Every time he held it, he remembered the lessons. Patience, listening, following the grain, letting things become what they wanted to be. Not forcing, not fighting, just guiding, releasing, allowing. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire kept burning. And somewhere between the two, Frank Hensley waited for the end, not with fear but with something that felt almost like curiosity. What came next? What was on the other side of the change? The forest knew, even if he didn't. And soon enough, he would know too. Soon enough, he would give back what he'd borrowed, would become part of the eternal cycle, would feed new life with his death. It was enough, more than enough. It was, surprisingly, everything. December came with teeth. The cold settled into the valley like something living, something patient and hungry. Frank woke most mornings to find ice on the inside of his windows, his breath visible even inside the cabin despite the fire he kept burning through the night. His body was failing in ways that were impossible to ignore now. The weight loss had accelerated. He was down to maybe 130 pounds, his ribs visible, his wrists thin as kindling. The pain had moved beyond what River's plants could manage, a deep grinding ache that radiated from his gut through his entire body. But his mind was clear. That was the gift River had given him. The plants didn't fog him the way the pills had. The pain was there, sharp and honest, but he was there too, present, awake, alive, for whatever time remained. He still made it to the creek most evenings, though the trips were getting harder. Sometimes he had to stop and rest 3 or 4 times on the walk down, leaning against trees, catching his breath, waiting for the pain to ease enough to keep moving. River was always there, waiting with that infinite patience, never rushing him, never showing impatience or pity, just presence, just companionship. They didn't always talk anymore. Sometimes Frank didn't have the energy for words. They would just sit together in the cold, watching the creek slow and thicken, watching the ice advance from the banks toward the center, watching winter claim everything. River seemed to understand that silence could be its own kind of conversation, that presence mattered more than words. One evening in mid-December, Frank made it halfway to the creek before his legs gave out. He sat down hard on a fallen log, the impact jarring, sending spikes of pain through his gut that made him gasp. He sat there for maybe 20 minutes, trying to gather the strength to stand, to keep moving. But his body wouldn't cooperate. He was done. This was as far as he was going. He heard River before he saw him, not because River made noise, but because the forest went quiet the way it always did when River moved through it. Then River was there, materializing from the twilight, his massive form solid and real in the fading light. "Can't make it," Frank said. His voice came out thin, reedy, an old man's voice. "Legs won't work right." River knelt down in front of him, those dark eyes searching Frank's face. "Close now," he said softly. "Very close. Days, maybe. Not weeks. Yeah, I can feel it. Like something's unwinding inside me. Like I'm already halfway gone, and my body just hasn't figured it out yet. You want stay? At creek? Or go back?" Frank thought about it. The creek was where they'd met, where they'd shared so much. It felt right somehow to be there at the end, but he was so tired, and the cold was eating through his coat, through his skin, settling in his bones. "Back," he finally said. "I need to be inside, need the fire." River nodded. Then, without asking permission, he scooped Frank up, one arm under his knees, one behind his back, lifting him like a child, like he weighed nothing at all. Frank wanted to protest, to say he could walk, that he didn't need help, but the lie wouldn't come. He did need help. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. River carried him back to the cabin with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something that large. Frank rested his head against River's chest and felt the deep, slow rhythm of that massive heart, felt the warmth radiating through that thick hair. It was like being carried by the forest itself, by something ancient and patient and stronger than stone. Inside the cabin, River set Frank down in his chair by the stove, built up the fire until heat rolled through the small space in waves, made tea from plants Frank didn't recognize, bitter and earthy, that somehow eased the pain to a distant murmur. Then River sat on the floor beside Frank's chair, his head level with Frank's shoulder, and they stayed like that while the winter night pressed against the windows. "Tell me about her," Frank said eventually. "Your mate. What was she like?" River was quiet for so long Frank thought he wouldn't answer. But finally, in that deep rumbling voice, he began to speak. "She was light," River said. "Where I was heavy, she was light, quick, always moving, always curious. She loved small things, birds, flowers, the way light hit water. I loved big things, mountains, storms, the deep forest. She taught me to see small. I taught her to not be afraid of big." "How did you meet?" "Young. Both young. Our families traveled together sometimes. Saw her across clearing one day and knew. Just knew. Like forest tells you which way to go when lost. No question. Just knowing." "How long were you together?" "Long time. Many seasons. Raised young together. 3. 2 daughters, 1 son. They grew. They left. Found mates. Went north, with others when humans came too close. We stayed. Too old to travel far. Too tired to start over." River paused, and something in his voice changed, grew heavier. "She got sick. Slowly at first, then faster. Her body stopped working right. Couldn't eat, couldn't walk far. Pain all the time. Like me," Frank said softly. "Like you. I tried everything. Every plant, every medicine our people knew. Nothing helped. Just got worse. One morning she didn't wake up. Heart stopped in sleep. Quick death. Good death. Better than slow death. But hurt anyway. Hurt worse than anything." "How long ago?" 60 winters. Maybe 65. Hard to count. Time strange after she gone. Days all the same. Years all the same, just continuing, breathing, waiting. 60 years. Frank tried to imagine that much grief, that much solitude, that many decades alone. It was staggering. Why didn't you go north with your children? Why stay? Couldn't leave her bones. Couldn't leave place we lived. All our memories here, all our life here. Leaving felt like betraying her, like saying she didn't matter. So I stayed, watched world change, watched humans spread like water, watched my people disappear, stayed anyway. Do you regret it? River thought about that. No, yes, both. Lonely, staying, but leaving would be more lonely. Being with people but not with her. Worse, at least here. I feel her sometimes. In wind, in trees, in places we walk together. Not real. I know not real, but feels real. That enough. Frank understood that completely. The not quite hallucinations, the sense of presence that had no physical form. He'd felt Martha like that sometimes, not memory, not ghost, just a sense of her moving through rooms, standing in doorways, looking over his shoulder. I know exactly what you mean. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Two old beings at the end of their stories, keeping each other company in the darkness. Frank felt sleep pulling at him, but he fought it. Sleep was getting dangerous now. He was never quite sure if he'd wake up. Soon, maybe very soon, he wouldn't. River, he said quietly. When it happens, when I don't wake up, will you really take me to the high place? Put me in the earth like you promised. Yes, already found spot. Good spot. South-facing slope. Sun in morning. Creek nearby. Trees all around. She buried there too. You will be together. Two humans, one of my people. All teaching each other. All part of same forest. Frank felt something crack open in his chest. Some last resistance crumbling. I'd like that. Being buried with her. Seems right somehow. Two people who lost their mates. Finding each other at the end. Keeping each other company. Not end. River corrected gently. Change. Roots become trees. Trees become shelter. Shelter becomes home. Home becomes forest. Forest becomes everything. Not end. Just different. I want to believe that. Believe or not. Believe doesn't matter. True anyway. Forest doesn't need belief. Forest just is. Over the next few days, Frank mostly stayed inside. The cold was too brutal, his body too weak. He could barely make it from his chair to his bed, from his bed to the small bathroom. Everything hurt, not just his gut anymore, but everything. His bones ached, his skin ached, breathing ached, existing ached. But River came every evening, let himself in without knocking, built up the fire, made tea, sat with Frank while darkness filled the windows. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes River told stories about his people, about the old days, about a world that had existed before humans learned to build cities and write things down. Sometimes Frank talked about his life. Vietnam, marriage, construction work, the ordinary miracle of 43 years with Martha. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Two beings who'd gone beyond the need for constant conversation. One evening, River brought something with him. Another carving, smaller than the first. He placed it on the table where Frank could see it. Two figures sitting together, one massive, one small, one covered in hair, one in clothes. Side by side, looking out at something beyond the frame of the carving. Us, River said simply. So you remember, when you change, when you become trees, this stays, this remembers. Frank picked up the carving with shaking hands. The detail was extraordinary. He could see his own gaunt face, River's patient expression, the way they sat together like two parts of the same story. It's perfect, he whispered. It's exactly us. Keep together, River said, gesturing to both carvings. Two pieces, one story, human alone, human with friend, shows change, shows connection, shows what matters. That night, after River left, Frank wrote another letter to Sarah. His handwriting was shaky, the letters large and uneven, but he got the words down. Told her he loved her. Told her he was sorry for leaving, sorry for choosing distance over difficulty, sorry for not being the father she needed after Martha died. Told her about River, about the teachings, about learning to die well. Told her where the carvings were, asked her to keep them, to remember that her father had found peace at the end, had found friendship in an impossible place, had learned to let go with grace instead of fear. He put the letter in an envelope, addressed it, stamped it, left it on the table where it couldn't be missed. If Sarah came looking when she came looking, she'd find it. Along with the carvings, along with the bowl, along with whatever else remained of Frank Hensley's last year on Earth. The cancer was winning now. He could feel it colonizing his body, setting up shop in places it didn't belong, transforming him from the inside out. His skin had taken on a yellow cast, jaundice creeping in. His belly was distended, swollen with fluid. His appetite was gone completely. He forced himself to drink water, to take small sips of River's bitter tea, but solid food was beyond him. He knew it was almost time, could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. The pain had gone beyond pain now, had become something else, something that couldn't be named or described. His consciousness was starting to flutter, to blink in and out like a bad signal. He'd lose minutes, sometimes hours, coming back to himself with no memory of where they'd gone. On what Frank somehow knew would be his last evening, he woke from one of those absences to find River sitting beside him. The fire was built up high, the cabin warm as summer. River's massive hand rested on Frank's shoulder, gentle and grounding. "Time," River said softly. "You know, I know. Time. Yeah," Frank whispered. His voice was barely there, more breath than sound. "I'm ready. I'm so tired, River. So goddamn tired. I know. Rest now. Let go. Forest waiting. She waiting. You go to her now. Long time alone. Not alone anymore." "Stay?" Frank asked. "Stay until?" "Stay," River promised. "Stay whole time. Not leave. You not die alone. Die with friend. D with forest. D true." Frank closed his eyes. The pain was there, distant and vast. But it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except this moment. This presence. This gentle hand on his shoulder anchoring him to the world while he prepared to leave it. He thought about Martha, about seeing her again, about 43 years together not being enough, but being everything anyway. He thought about Sarah, hoped she'd understand, hoped she'd forgive him, hoped she'd learn to forgive herself. He thought about the bowl, about patience and listening, about following the grain. He thought about the forest taking him back, about his bones feeding trees, about becoming part of the endless cycle. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't even sad. It just was inevitable, natural, right. His breathing changed, became shallow and irregular. River's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. "Easy," River murmured. "Easy now. Let go. I got you. Forest got you. Everything got you. Let go." Frank let go. His last conscious thought wasn't about pain or fear or loss. It was about gratitude. For this impossible friendship, for these last months of teaching and learning, for being seen and known at the end, for not dying alone in a white room under fluorescent lights, for dying here, in his cabin, with the fire burning and the forest breathing outside, and a friend keeping watch. He left the world the way winter leaves quietly, naturally, making room for what came next. His body stopped fighting, his heart slowed, paused, stopped, his breathing ceased. The Frank Hensley who'd spent 67 years walking the earth, who'd loved and lost and grieved and endured, who'd built things and broken things and learned at the very end how to let things be, that Frank Hensley was gone. But something remained. The bowl on the shelf, the carvings on the table, the letter waiting to be found, the cabin itself, empty now but full of presence. And River, sitting vigil through the night, honoring his promise, keeping watch over his friend's body while the winter stars wheeled overhead and the forest held its breath. When morning came, grey and cold, River lifted Frank's body with the same gentleness he'd shown carrying him alive, wrapped him in blankets, carried him out into the December morning. The snow was deep now, but River moved through it effortlessly, following trails no human could see, ascending into the high country where the air was thin and clean and the trees grew sparse. He climbed for hours until he reached a south-facing slope where the sun hit in the mornings, where a small creek sang even in winter, where aspens grew between the pines and wildflowers would bloom in spring. And there, beneath a lightning-struck pine that had died years ago but still stood like a monument, he found the place he'd prepared. Next to another grave, older, the earth settled, moss growing over the stones, he'd arranged there 65 winters ago. His mate, still here, still waiting. River set Frank down gently, used his hands to dig, the earth hard with frost but yielding eventually to his strength and determination. He dug until the hole was deep enough, until Frank would be safe from scavengers, until the earth could take him back and begin the work of transformation. He placed Frank in the earth with ceremony, with reverence, with the kind of care you show to someone who mattered, folded his hands across his chest, closed his eyes, arranged the blankets around him like he was sleeping, like he might wake up warm and rested. Then River did something he hadn't done since his own mate died. He sang a song in a language no human had spoken in 100 generations, a song about returning and becoming and the endless cycle of life and death and life again. His voice rolled across the mountainside, deep and resonant, a sound that belonged to the earth itself. He covered Frank with soil, gently at first, then more quickly as the hole filled, placed stones over the top, arranged them carefully, marking the spot. When he was finished, he sat between the two graves, his mate on one side, his friend on the other, and he wept. Not from sadness exactly, but from the sheer weight of it all. The losses, the loneliness, the long years, the brief bright moments of connection, everything that had been and everything that would never be again. He sat there for 3 days. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat and kept watch. On the third day, he stood, touched each grave, one ancient, one new, spoke to them both. Not alone now, he said quietly. Together now. Teach each other. Keep each other company. I visit when can. Bring flowers in spring. Keep weeds clear. Remember. Then he turned and walked back down the mountain, back to the empty cabin, back to the valley that had held so much life and now held so much absence. He would stay a while longer, make sure things were in order, wait for Frank's daughter. She would come eventually, would find the letter, would need to know what happened. He would show her if she could see him, would stay hidden if she couldn't. Either way, he would make sure she understood. Her father died well, died at peace, died true to himself. And after that, River didn't know. Maybe he would finally go north, try to find what remained of his people. Maybe he would stay here, keep watching over 2 graves on a mountainside until his own time came. Maybe it didn't matter. The forest would decide. The forest always decided. Sarah Hensley arrived at the cabin 3 weeks later, in early January. She'd been trying to reach her father for weeks, had finally driven out, when he stopped answering his phone, found the cabin locked, silent, cold, used the spare key she'd forgotten she had, let herself into the stillness, found the letter on the table, the carvings beside it, the bowl on the shelf, glowing even in the winter light. Read her father's words with tears streaming down her face, his apology, his love, his strange story about a creature in the woods, his lessons about letting go. She thought he'd lost his mind at the end, that the cancer had made him hallucinate, but she kept the carvings anyway. The bowl too, something about them felt important, felt true in a way she couldn't explain. She called the sheriff, reported her father missing. Search parties combed the area, but found nothing. His body was never recovered. The official report listed Frank Hensley as missing, presumed dead, likely succumbed to his illness, somewhere in the vast wilderness he'd called home. Sarah eventually sold the cabin, couldn't bear to keep it. But she took the carvings and the bowl back to Seattle, put them on a shelf in her living room where she could see them every day. And sometimes, usually late at night, when the house was quiet and her family asleep, she'd take down the bowl, hold it, run her fingers over the grain, and wonder if maybe her father's story had been true. Wonder if somewhere in those mountains, something ancient and impossible had kept him company at the end. Wonder if he was really gone, or if he'd just changed, become part of the forest, was still there somehow in the trees and the earth, and the endless cycle. She never knew for certain, never saw any proof. But sometimes, when she held the bowl, she felt something. Not her father exactly, but something he'd touched, something he'd learned, some truth he'd tried to pass on. And slowly, over the years, she started to understand, started to slow down, started to listen, started to see the connections between things, the way everything fed into everything else, started to take her own children into the woods, teach them to be quiet, to watch, to respect what they didn't understand. The lessons her father learned from an impossible teacher, passed on to her, passed on again to her children, rippling outward like stones dropped in still water, not ending, just changing, just continuing. The forest remembered. Even if Sarah couldn't quite believe, even if the world went on thinking Bigfoot was a myth and Frank Hensley died alone, the forest remembered. The graves on the mountainside remembered. The bowl remembered. The carvings remembered. And somewhere in the high country, where aspens grew between the pines and wildflowers bloomed in spring, where two graves lay side by side beneath a dead pine, the forest kept its vigil, kept its secrets, kept teaching anyone patient enough, quiet enough, open enough to listen. The lessons were still there, still waiting, still true, for anyone brave enough to sit by a creek at sunset and wait to see what emerged from the trees. Years later, hikers would sometimes report strange things in those mountains. A sense of being watched, enormous footprints that appeared and vanished, a sound like distant thunder that might have been a voice, might have been nothing. Stories accumulated the way stories do, adding to the mythology, feeding the legend. But legends aren't always lies. Sometimes they're just truths that don't fit in the boxes we've built, truths that stay wild and free and unexplained. Sometimes the impossible sits down beside us and teaches us how to die well, how to live honestly, how to let go with grace. Sometimes the forest speaks, if we're quiet enough to hear it. Sometimes grief finds companionship in the strangest places. Sometimes dying is just changing, and changing is just continuing, and continuing is just another word for living. Frank Hensley learned that, carried it with him when he gave himself back to the earth, left it behind for anyone willing to pick it up, dust it off, let it change them. The bowl still exists, sitting on a shelf in Seattle. The carvings too, small things, ordinary things, that somehow contain universes, that somehow hold the memory of an impossible friendship, an unexpected grace, a truth too large for words, but perfectly expressed in wood grain and patient hands, and the endless cycle of death, becoming life, becoming death, becoming life again. The forest knows, even if we've forgotten, even if we never knew, the forest remembers everything. For those who wander in wilderness, looking for answers or escape, or simply silence, pay attention to the spaces between sounds. Notice what watches from the shadows, and if you're lucky, if you're open, if you're ready to learn what trees already know, sit down. Be still, wait. See what sits down beside you. See what teaches you how to let go. See what shows you the way home.